Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me today. My guest is going to tell us a bit about his situation where he lost his mother at a very young age. So, guest, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell our listeners about your story.
Yeah, my name is Brian. My story starts actually probably, I'm kind of not too sure about the time frame on it, but about 7 or 8 years old, my parents got divorced. And so it was just me and my sister. We went to live with my mother, and my father, he had at that point went to Las Vegas. I don't really remember why he went there. I knew I had family out there at that point. So he went out there to kind of, he was still young. I think he wanted to kind of, maybe do some partying, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to live with my mother. She actually met a really nice guy. His name was Guy. She started dating him. We moved in with him. He owned a house in Illinois, in northwest or northeast Illinois, and kind of like a suburb of Chicago. And the rest of my family is mostly in northwest Indiana, so it's about an hour and a half away. So we were just out there, just us, no other family out there. And we had a great life going. His son, he shared custody with his ex-wife. So he would come over and spend the night, and we'd have, good times. We talked about Star Wars, blah, blah, blah. We were good friends. And they talked about having plans about either moving to Portland or Seattle. And that, I didn't know anything about the place, back then. I just knew that was where they wanted to move. That was the plan. And then I remember one day, I think it was after New Year's of 1982. I was 9 years old. I was in bed sleeping, and I remember hearing a knock at the door, and I heard my mother get up, and she went to the door, and I can hear a police officer talking to her and explaining to her that Guy had passed away in a car accident. And I remember laying there in the bed, and I'm like, do I get up? I mean, I didn't know what to do. I had never, that was the first person I'd ever heard of that had died. So I just kind of laid there. When I ended up falling back asleep, I remember I woke up the next morning, there was people over, big commotion, everybody explained what happened, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the time, I was 10 or 9, so I didn't know at the time, but Guy's ex-wife was going to be getting that house. So that was going to her now. And we had to move out. We had to find a place to live. My mom was only working part-time because Guy made great money. So she only worked part-time just to kind of have something to do and bring in some extra cash. So she was waitressing, 3 nights a week or whatever. So she had to start picking up extra shifts now because, we had bills to pay. And his ex-wife was really nice about it. She let us live there for a couple months, but, she was kind of like, okay, we kind of, something's got to happen. We got to get you guys out. And I think she was trying to get a hold of my grandparents and talking to them and trying to explain that, she needed somewhere to go. And I feel like everywhere she was turning, I think she was getting let down and nobody was really offering to help her. And I think she just felt really, alone and lost. And she started coming home late from work, I think, like a couple times a week. We had to have a babysitter at that point. And then I remember, just standing at the window watching all the time because I knew something was off. Just something felt off of her. She never used to come home. I mean, she didn't come home drunk, but she'd come home maybe a half hour, 40 minutes later than she normally would. And, she'd have a drink or two or whatever. And, it just wasn't herself. And then I remember in March, so that was a couple months later, end of March, on my birthday. Oh, so before that, actually before that, there was a day, it was after a guy had passed away, and we were driving in the car. And I remember out of the blue, and it wasn't like a question, like she asked it like, what would you want for dinner? She said, hey, if I ever died, who would you want to live with? Mom or a dad or grandma and grandpa? And I'm like, what? And my sister was only like 4 at the time. So she kind of, didn't really know what to do with that question. But I was like, I just said dad out of my just first response. But then I remember saying, I go, oh, I hope I die before you. And I think she goes, well, oh, she said, why do you feel like that? And I said, well, I just, I don't want to be around without you. I don't want to live without my mom. And she said, well, when people die, if they have things left on earth, whatever, like a child to raise, blah, 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 that they'll always be there and they'll always be watching over you. So, that was kind of like her way of kind of easing that question, I guess. And I never thought about it, never brought it up to anybody. Never thought to.
Well, at the age of 9, that's kind of, I mean, little heavy for someone to try to read into, I mean, that's not something I think a 9-year-old would figure out.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't like looking farther into it. I just, you're a kid, your parents ask you questions all the time. You're learning things every day. I just thought, okay, maybe it's just something people ask sometimes. I don't know. Who knows? But I feel like between that and the times coming home late, I feel like that was maybe why I got that. I don't know, that feeling something was off. Like I just couldn't put my finger on it. So then my birthday came, and then my father at that point had moved back to Northwest Indiana. So the plan was him to come out to pick me up, me and my sister, go back to Indiana, have my birthday with all my family, grandparents, other aunts, uncles, all that. And then at the end of the weekend, he'd bring us back. So he picked us up, took us, we had the birthday, had a great time. And then the night before, I remember him calling her. So this is before cell phones and everything. So he was calling and calling and calling. There was no answering machines back then either. So he kept calling and calling, and she wasn't answering, and I could tell something was bothering him. I could tell that something was wrong. And I'm like, why is he bothered by this? Big deal. She's not answering. So what? And I didn't think that was a big deal. Then the next morning he woke up, kept calling, no answer. He was calling other people, and finally he decided, okay, you know what? We're just going to make the drive and see what's going on. And it was like a 90-minute drive. So, that's why he didn't want to make it if she wasn't going to be there. So we get there, and the house in the garage they're not attached. So we get there, and we go up to the door. We look, and the front door had a window, so you can see in it, kind of like not frosted, but you can still see through it. And I could see the dining room table. I could see her purse, and I could see a gallon of milk and a bag of groceries. And the phone's ringing off the hook. I can hear the phone ringing off the hook. People are trying to call. So yeah, we're trying to figure out what to do. So my dad, he lifts me up, and I look into the garage, and I can see her car in there, because he lifted me up to peek into the window. And I see her car. No her, nothing. The door's shut. It's dark in there. I don't see anything. So I go, yeah, her car's in there. So he's like, okay, well, let's go to breakfast. He took us to breakfast, and he obviously, while we were there, he was out on the payphone making phone calls. Well, guy's ex-wife happened to be a police officer, so she responded to that call. And I think, yeah, we left breakfast. We got back to the house, and I remember just seeing cop cars in the driveway. So yeah, we see the police cars in the driveway. We pull up. My dad gets out of the car, and guy's ex-wife gets in the car, and she's, hey, how was your birthday? What'd you get for your birthday? And show me what you got and all this stuff. And meanwhile, I'm like, like, shouldn't he be worried? Like, what's going on here? I look out back, I'm looking at my dad, and he's just talking to the police, and he's shaking his head. And I don't remember how she got out of the car, but my dad finally gets back in the car, doesn't say anything for a few minutes. We start driving, and I'm like, so where's mom? And he goes, they can't find her. We don't know where she's at. And I'm like, okay. But meanwhile, the garage door was open, and I could see her car in there still. So I'm like, she's, something's not right here. But I'm 10 years old, whatever. So I'm like, I'm going to wait for them the adults to explain it to me. But halfway back, he pulled off and told us what happened, that she was dead, but he didn't say anything about how she died. And nobody actually, they just said she fell asleep in the car. She came home late and fell asleep in the car. So for a couple of years, I think I just chalked it up as that. My family took the approach of really not, we didn't really talk about it. Figured maybe the less he talked about it, the less I knew, the better for me, maybe. I don't know. But talking to, friends and people outside of my family, they would say, oh, how's blah, blah, blah. And what about your mom? And I would say, oh, my mom passed away. And in talking about that, the subject would come up about how, and then I would think about how it happened. And I remember thinking, how the heck did she park the car, get out, go into the house, put all the groceries down, or her purse with everything she needs in her purse, lock the door behind her, get in the car, shut the garage door behind her, and then start the car? I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. So for the longest time, I was upset after that. I was like, I was upset with my family a little bit. Why didn't you guys tell me? But half of them didn't really want to believe that that's what happened. I think they thought maybe it was an accident, and they thought, well, why push this on him if we think this? So I was never really given any other options of what could have happened with that. So I just went with what they told me. And so after that, I noticed how, in relationships after that, definitely the loss factor weighed in. If anybody I dated or, cared for was telling me, hey, I'll be home at 10 o'clock, and 10:15, 10:20 comes around, they're not there, I would start to panic and start to worry. And, unfortunately, a lot of past relationships took that as being, maybe controlling or something like that, but it was more out of a fear of, maybe something's wrong. And it's been crippling, that fear. It's gotten better to this point at my life now, where I don't think like that anymore, but I do still have a little bit of a worry. I just usually, it's nice when my wife texts, hey, I just got here, hey, I'm on my way. And it relaxes me so much more after that. So But uh, my father, I remember when I looked out that back window and I remember seeing him putting his hand on his head, shaking his head. I remember him. It wasn't so much sad, but it was more like a guilt. And come to find out, my father, this is probably I was in my early, no, it was in my mid to late 20s. He was showing signs of kind of being depressed or whatever, and then he tried to take his own life by taking a bunch of pills, and uh, they seemed like more like cries for help than actual suicide attempts. But when we finally got a bunch of people together and kind of had a little intervention with him, come to find out he had been holding this guilt this whole time. My mother, I guess, had been feeling like she couldn't sleep and she needed uh, help sleeping with sleeping pills. So I don't know what he gave her, but apparently in the autopsy they found the whole bottle in her stomach, but they said they hadn't even digested yet. So that's what didn't kill her. It was the car. So I told him that, and I'm like, that. So I mean, he felt like it was his fault this whole time, and he's a stubborn guy. It was hard to talk him out of that. I'm like, Dad, I go, you did what you thought you were helping. I mean, you didn't know know what she was planning on doing with that. I mean, she had just lost her fiance. You didn't know what she was going through. She needed those. So needless to say, I think he was already on that road. It was kind of too late where he was becoming addicted to pain pills to kind of numb himself. Like he didn't want to, it seemed like he just didn't want to feel anything anymore. Like he just kind of, I don't know. It just got to the point where he just passed away in his sleep one day, just from, he was mixing, his philosophy on taking pills was if you were prescribed 1 a day, 3 a day would make you feel even better. So he had always abused that, even when he was younger. Even he abused aspirin when I was a child, for Christ's sakes. But
Yeah,
but
that's not unusual. My father was a pretty heavy duty alcoholic, and he had vascular issues, and his doctor, who didn't know because he didn't share with her that he was an alcoholic, told him that he should drink a glass of red wine every day because that would help with his vascular system. And so that meant to him to drink, 2, 3, 4 bottles of wine each day because what a little bit's good, well, then a lot's better. So
right, yeah, yep. They self-medicate. They think it's they think they know better, um, but one of the kind of the I don't want to say a cool thing that came out of it, but one of the things that came out of this was an interesting story where it was about 9 or 10 months after my son was born. And at that point, I was working graveyard. My wife was working mornings. So it kind of worked out to where when I got home, an hour later, she was leaving. So I had the whole day with my son. And, we'd hang out and play, or we'd do whatever. And I remember this one day, he was in his walker, and I was sitting on the couch, and he was starting to walk around to the backside of the couch. And as I looked over at him, I'm like, hey, where are you going? I forgot there was a picture right on my end table of my mother. And it was the strangest thing, because it was the first time in like the time he'd been born that I thought, oh my God, you're never going to meet your grandmother. And I remember in my head, I said that to myself. I said, wow, I wish you were here so you could meet your grandson. And, there's no reason for me to repeat that to anybody. So it was just something I said in my head, like my wife came home, I didn't say, oh, hey, by the way, I had this thought today, and I just dropped it. And I had a trip coming up to Chicago so soon. And I remember about 3 days later, after that incident where I'd said that, my wife came to me and she goes, "Oh, hey, I forgot to tell you, I had a dream about your mom the other night." And I go, "What?" I go, "You never met her." And she goes, "I know." She goes, and at that point, our son had slept in our bed with us sometimes, so he would happen to be in our bed that night. And she said she remembers feeling like she was floating off the bed, and she panicked and reached over and grabbed our son and put him on her chest, because she was like, "What's going on?" And she looks at the foot of the bed and she can see my mom standing there. She said, "You need to remind my son something I told him when he was a child." So after that, a few days go by. I'm racking my brain. I'm thinking, what could this be? Should I not get on this plane? Is this a sign? Is the plane going to crash? I mean, you know, everything was going through my head. I'm like, it was driving me nuts. And then it finally popped into my head. It was the talk she had with me in the car. And she was telling me that she would be there. Yeah, so she basically answered my question, or what my statement. I wish you were here to see your grandson. So
She wanted you to know she was.
mhm.
It's an amazing story. Have you had, or your son or your wife, whatever, have had any other visits with her that you know of?
No, but I know one night, and this was probably 10 years ago, my son said he smelled pipe tobacco in his bedroom. And my grandfather on my father's side smoked a pipe. But other than that, I think, yeah, that was the only one, because yeah, none of my other family. I think my dad, he had a dream about her once too, but it wasn't anything like that. It was more of I think more of like a memory of her. But the thing about that dream, I remember after I figured it out, and I remember thinking, okay, why the heck did she not come to me? Why did she go to my wife? Like, why not me? And then I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, if she would have came to me, I would have just chalked it up as a dream,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't have meant anything. But coming from someone that didn't know either of those things, and that having an outside person connect those two things for me, that's when it became like, okay, she really answered me on that one. It wasn't like just a hope or a thought.
It really was a message. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
exactly what my comment was going to be, for her to tell the message through someone who didn't know her,
Yep.
who wouldn't have known that she'd told you that when you were a child.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because I didn't really tell that story about what she had asked until one day when one of my aunts was pretty convinced it was an accident. And I was trying to tell her all these details, and I'm like, all these things, and she's like, well, I said, with all these things I told her, she didn't know about, like, she didn't know I saw the groceries on the table. She didn't know, like, she didn't know about any of those details. So it was kind of like they kept stuff from me, but if they would have brought it up, we could have probably, you know, figured this out at an earlier time. But that's the other part about it too, is I think people tend to try to not talk about it because it's, I get it, it's too painful, but I feel like if you let it go too long, it can become like something inside that grows, and if you don't talk about it, it could be something painful for you. Like I've talked about this to many people because I feel like the more I talk about it, the better I feel about it. And I realized she didn't do this to because she didn't want us, or didn't want to be a mother anymore or anything like that. I never felt that. I always felt like she, I felt her stress of being like alone and having nobody to turn to. I could sense it. Like I could tell, but it wasn't anything she did outright. It was just an everyday thing she did. And, I realized she had nowhere to go. Like there was nowhere for her to turn. And I think she thought we would be in better hands with either my father or my grandmother. And I think that's why she wanted to know, who do you want to go with if that happens? Because she was trying to, make a better life for us.
Yeah.
But, not in my opinion, a better life isn't always, you know, a nice roof over your head and all those things. It's just having the people that mean the most to you. I mean, it would have meant more to have her and not have those things.
Yeah. I know from my own experience, having experienced pretty deep depression in my life, that when you get to the point of thinking that you need to just end it, you think that people around you will be better off. And it's
Oh yeah. Mhm.
like if I'm in so much pain, I'm really causing pain to people. So I'm doing them a favor by taking this pain away. So um, I know for kids, when it's really hard because you're thinking, well, why didn't they want to, stick around for me? But I know it's no solace to say that they don't think of it the same way when the person in that depressive state just doesn't. Your mind is not working at all, and it's very difficult to um, describe to someone who
Yeah,
has.
it's like you're in a hole and you can't dig yourself out. I mean,
And you
you
can't
feel.
see your way. Yeah, you can't see your way out. You're stuck
Yeah,
in space of there's nothing I can do, and it's all bad. And it's yeah. Anyway, it's a horrible space that yeah, I don't ever want to be there again, and I wouldn't wish anybody to be there because it's just brutal.
yeah,
So,
and it's part losing a parent in that way as a kid too. I feel like you always look at your parents as maybe not superheroes, but you know your dad's the toughest guy in the world, your mom's
yeah,
the best mom in the world, blah blah blah. And to see that something can get to them to cause them to do something like that, it kind of wakes you up a little bit. You're like, okay, you know I kind of gotta. It kind of made me grow up a little bit faster than I think I should have.
you
Even
should,
though even though a lot of my family, I I felt like they coddled me too much afterwards. Out of guilt, they felt bad for me, and I my grandmother would cook me all my meals. She did all my laundry for me. I never had to do laundry and stuff like that, and those ended up being bad things for me from when I moved out on my own. It was a rude awakening that I had all those things to do on my own. But yeah, I mean, it was crazy because yeah, I didn't realize it, but there was some animosity too with a lot of my family. Like a lot of my cousins, like were upset with me because I got such special attention from other
mm,
family members. But I didn't realize I was getting it from that. I just thought, you know, they just loved me.
yeah, and they were probably, and that was were these grandparents your mother's parents or your father's parents?
These were my father's because my mother's were that way too in the beginning, but unfortunately, a few years after my mother passed, they passed too. So they weren't around too much longer, so I didn't really get to know them that much more. But
Well,
my other.
I guess it'd be with those grandparents that they were trying to fill in this void. I mean, it's
Yes, oh yeah, I see it a lot of time with people that with kids. They instead of disciplining their kid, they say, here's a candy bar if you behave. And I feel like that was the equivalent what they did with me. Like, hey, you don't have to do your chores around the house. Don't worry about it. Well, we got it. Type thing. But
so a question I have for you would be if you had having had all that happen to you as a kid, if you were talking to an adult with kids, maybe that same age, and this kind of thing happened, what would you advise them to do differently than how your family kind of dealt with this with you?
uh, it it would depend. I think, like I said, with my family, I think half of them weren't weren't willing to believe it was a suicide. I think they were torn. So that was the reason why I think they didn't really talk about it, because if one family member was telling me my mother died by an accident and the other one told me it was suicide, and then they would have a conflicting story. So I think they just chose the road of, let's just not talk about it
Yeah.
until he's older, maybe. So I would I would say if it's a clear case that someone is lost from suicide, I would say definitely talk about it, because it, it can, especially with the kid, because I feel like when you get older, you feel like you were left out, like you should have been able to be in on some of the decisions that were made or whatever. I just feel like, yeah, I feel like that I was left out of that whole situation. Like I would have loved to have known more details. I get it, I was only 10, but um and there was no way for them to know that I could maybe handle that at that time. But I think I handled it pretty well. Uh, my whole life, my family has been telling me that they just can't believe that it hasn't affected me in a negative way. But it has, but nothing to the point where it's like, socially obvious. It's just
Yeah. No,
internal things.
I can relate to that. Your comment about, being anxious when someone didn't come home or wasn't where they were for so long. That actually happened to me as well. When I was living in New York and my fiance at the time was in a car accident and lived for 5 days before he died. And that night,
Mm-hmm.
he was always home by a certain time, and that night he didn't come home. And I remember pouring myself a glass of wine. And as the time went by, I was more and more and more anxious. And I guess this is, obviously before cell phones, it's the mid 80s. And then his father called me and said, he was in the hospital. So from that point on, Brian, I don't want to say it was at least 20 years before I finally could get to the point where if someone didn't call me or tell me where they were, I didn't go into a panic attack. And
Right.
I know without a doubt it was because of that incident. And um, I can remember telling my first husband that you have to let me know where you are. I have to know. I can't. It can't. It's not like I'm stalking you or being possessive. I must know, or I'm going to fear that you're in the ditch.
Yep.
Just
Yeah.
kind of
And
morbid as that sounds, it's just who I am. So
and and exactly, that's how I am with my wife now. I just say, hey, like if I'm at work and she's going out, I just say, all I ask is if you just text me when you leave, text me when you get wherever you're at, text me when you leave, and then text me when you get home. That way, if something does happen, at least I have a time frame of, I
yeah,
can say, okay, between this time and this time, something must have happened. So,
yeah. I mean, I even do that to this day. When my husband went to a funeral service yesterday, and it was about a 4-hour drive each way. And I told him, let me know when you get there, and then if you decide to stay overnight in town, let me know. Like
mm-hmm.
I just need to know. Just tell me. I mean, it's not me keeping tabs. It's me needing to know that you're okay. So I think that's definitely an impact that I can not only understand. I don't think it ever really goes away because it's
No, it doesn't.
especially when you're a kid. It's just, it's ingrained in your brain, your growing brain, and so on. As you,
Mm-hmm.
but wow, yours is a sad story, but I mean, I know you're a great guy. But yeah, I'm so sorry that happened to you when you were so young. It breaks my heart.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think maybe it might have been a good thing they didn't tell me in the beginning, because at first, it was a lot to deal with, just the fact that she was gone
Yeah.
and not have to deal with the way she was gone. I think
Yeah.
um, maybe it was good that they didn't tell me right away, um, but like I said, I think once you get to a certain age, they should know anyway. I think
Yeah.
they probably would have told me anyway, my family, I think. But like even on my mother's gravestone, it doesn't say the exact day she died. They didn't put that on there on purpose, just so I wouldn't see that. Maybe hoping that it would never come out. You know.
Yeah. That's extremely conservative of them, actually. That's
Yeah, it was. It
think
was.
about it, if you were in that situation as a parent, you would, what would you would know what to do. So you want to do just what I'm just going to try to take care of the things that I can take care of, and I can do this, or I can make this decision, and because I can't, bring this person back or make it better. But that was, yeah, that was somebody having some foresight there. So that's
Mhm.
great. So is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know or to hear, or advice, anything along those lines?
Um, Maybe the only other advice I would say is with my mother's, I was obviously was too young to uh, pick up on the clues in time. But with my father, it was pretty obvious. But it was kind of one of them things where you thought, okay, he's always been this way. He's just always being that way. He's always being that way. And it's just, you never think it's going to happen one day. So
Yeah.
my advice would be is if you see something like that happening, don't wait around till it's too late. I mean, if you see somebody that's abusing prescription drugs or any type of drugs or whatever, like don't wait and think, okay, that maybe this is the phase they're going through. Just do something about it early. That way you can prevent it possibly.
Or at least ask the questions, right? Rather than
Or
just,
that,
to pretend like it's no big deal. Ask the questions. Hey, are you okay?
right?
Right?
Yeah. Do you really need these? Do you, why are you, what's going on?
At least acknowledge it, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Cause I think a lot of times people don't realize people are onto them and they don't know. So maybe if you bring it up to them, they go, okay, it's obvious that they know. So maybe I better clean it up.
Or seek some help if I need help,
or
right?
or
What
that, yeah, definitely.
just I'm not suffering in silence over here is the kind of the point, I think, for that one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you so much for being my guest today. I
Of course.
really, really appreciate it. I
Of
wish you
course.
all I wish you all the best, and I'm sure I will see you soon.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.